Okay, so this is my thyme plant that I've been growing in a pot for probably about 4 years now. Um, there's usually, when I'm caring for an herb in a pot, there's four things that I always consider. The first is the soil and the pot preparation. The second is how much to water it. The third is how and when to use fertilizer. And the fourth is pruning. So all four of these components are pretty important, and if you do them right, you're going to have a nice, long-lasting and healthy plant. So first things first, when I'm preparing the soil to pot a plant, it's a pretty straightforward process. So I like 1 gallon pots because they're small enough to move around but large enough to grow a healthy plant. But you can grow them in any size pot. And when I'm preparing the soil for this pot, what I like to do, and it's very common, is I'll grab a bunch of rocks out of my garden, just medium-sized rocks, and I'll put them in the bottom of the pot. And the reason why I do that, and it's quite a common practice, is the last 2.5 or 3 inches of the pot, if you were to just fill this pot with potting soil or dirt, then a lot of times at the very bottom, the soil can get really wet and soppy, and if it gets really wet and soppy, your roots down there can tend to be susceptible to root rot, and then you're going to get a plant that is not nearly as healthy, or it could kill off the plant. So rocks go in first, then you can put your soil. You can take soil out of the garden, or you can take potting soil. I don't have a seedling here because I don't need it, so I'm just going to say, if you can visualize this, planting this herb's really easy. Go to your garden center, get the seedling, pop it out of the container, dig a hole. You can even do it with your hand. You don't need any starter fertilizer. Put the herb in the hole, and then just kind of pat it and cover so it's flush, and put some water on it. That's how you plant it. This herb is really, really hardy, so you don't have to worry too much about, is it going to take, or do I need to do the right sensitive thing? Put it in the pot, put some water in it, in about 2 or 3 weeks you're going to start to get some new green growth. That's when you know the plant's starting to take. So once it starts to take, then you have to consider, okay, how much do I water this thing? And watering is entirely subjective to the temperature. So if it's hot, you got to water it more. If it's cold, you water it less. However, I do have a little trick that I'd like to do to test whether or not this plant needs water. So what I usually do if I'm checking for water is I'll push this bush aside and expose the dirt here that's in the pot, and I'll take my index finger and I'll stick it in up to my second knuckle. And when you pull your finger out, you check the dirt, and if your fingertip is dry, if it's kind of powdery, then it looks like you need to water. If it's still wet, then the plant has enough moisture, it's going to be fine. So I like to do that every 2-3 days. I'll just check to make sure, especially on hot days like today is going to be really hot. I can already tell this plant needs water right now because the heat is going to be intense. So the third thing is fertilizer. When you plant herbs in pots, more than likely you're going to need fertilizer, and the reason being is when you water plants in pots, a lot of the nutrient in the soil leaches out. It runs out the bottom of the pot. So you kind of have to supplement that soil nutrient with some fertilizer, and the choice you make in fertilizers is there's a lot of them out there, but I'm really picky when it comes to fertilizer. I like a fertilizer that promotes healthy soil and a healthy plant. This is stuff called Grow Power, which I really like. It's humus based, and it promotes the microbial growth in the soil. So I'm actually making a healthy plant and a healthy soil. A lot of fertilizers out there will burn the soil, kill off everything. They'll still give you a healthy plant because there's lots of phosphorus and nitrogen in it, but it kills off the soil, and so I don't want that. So I'm really picky when it comes to fertilizer. For fertilizer, I fertilize about 6 times a year, so once every 2 months I just read the directions as to how much to apply around the base of the plant and then water it. And And then there's pruning, and pruning is probably one of the neglected points of growing herbs, and it's really, really important. So when you're pruning, the reason why you prune is because these bushes, especially when you're using fertilizer, can tend to get pretty bushy, and when they get that dense, there's limited sunlight and air that gets in between the kind of the lower parts of the bush, and so when you have that limited sun and air, what happens is you get all this green on the top, and then inside you end up with all these dead sprigs. And to really have a good healthy plant, you want to have a lot of good air. And so what I do is I periodically will go through here, and I'll fish through here, and actually this is a perfect example right here. So here's a sprig where you can see that all the growth at the bottom has died, and then you've got some growth here that's been exposed to the air and the sun. So I usually will get rid of the stuff like this. I'd rather give more air, so when I pull my sprigs, I get complete sprigs that are totally healthy for my cooking. So I'll probably just dry this or use that today for something. So that's usually, those are the 4 steps that I do to prepare and take care of a thyme plant that I potted. You've got the pot preparation and consider drainage, watering, the fertilizer, and pruning. And last couple things about herbs in pots. One of the things I really like about putting herbs in pots is that since, for example, this is a perennial, it's going to come back year after year. So you just have to plant it once. And if you're in a cold weather climate, you can move this pot indoors during the wintertime, and it'll keep growing. You can also move it around in the sun or in the shade. You can put it in different areas. And also, in 1 gallon, it confines the plant. So you don't have this giant bush that you can't use. Thyme, oregano, marjoram, these herbs and these families, they're really pungent. Just a little bit goes a long way. So this is plenty of herb for me and my family, and I do a lot of cooking, stews, stocks, pastas, you name it. And this pot confines it, so it doesn't get gigantic, and I don't have a bunch of wasted herb, but also it gives enough room to have a nice healthy growth as long as I'm doing my 4 steps.